Many people go on road trips to do a bit of sightseeing, part of their vacation or drive to visit faraway relatives or to relocate to a new home. The following true creepy road trip stories of some details changed to protect the innocent. Me and Mom, I decided to go hitchhiking for a couple of months across Canada is something we planned for a long time, and he was the only friend of mine that I didn't mind spending a long time with because he's calm in stressful situations unlike me. I tend to overreact sometimes, especially when I'm driving. That's why we decided to hitchhike. And you know what, I was open to the adventure in hitchhiking is something I've never done before. And for me to enjoy this road trip, I'd had to not think about the film The Hit Chop, the original with Rutger Hauer, and watch that film with my dad as a kid. And to be honest, that film bought me off hitchhiking for life. But my mate Terry has hitchhiked so many times, he convinced me it was going to be alright, it's gonna be a blast. After what we went through, I'm never gonna hitchhike again. Oh, yeah, we're both alive. And we survived. And before we went on our adventure, I was convinced nothing bad's gonna happen to us. How wrong was I? We were about 10 days in our hitchhiking road trip, no drama, meeting noise people, and that's the thing. Most people are nice. They just want to help. Me and Terry had no arguments. We're getting on really well, when there was no time during those 10 days that we felt threatened or bored or unprepared. Then everything changed on that Thursday when the skies opened up and the rain was relentless. When we were trying to hitch our next ride, we were absolutely exhausted. It must have been nearly an hour before the lights of the pickup truck flashed us, and relieved we jumped in. The only way I can describe the guy's driving was that he must have been in his mid-50s. It's difficult to say how tall he was, because he was obviously sitting down, and the thing I remember about him was his eyes. Even in the dull lights of the early evening with the pouring rain outside, his eyes seemed to pierce through the dim light of his truck's cabin. I remember thinking at first, his eyes are like that, because he's been smoking crack. For now, thinking back, I was way off the mark. He was just a part of his look. He started driving, he didn't speak much, and we were exhausted, and just welcomed the warmth of his truck. Most of the journey was in total silence. And what was weird was that he had his radio on. But no music was playing. No one was talking on the radio, and I could make out that faint static sound coming through the truck speakers. I asked him if he had any sounds to listen to, or is there any radio channels that we can all listen to? And what really creeped me out was that he just ignored me, and awful he didn't hear me, so I raised my voice and asked him again to put the radio on, and after a few beats of silence he just shook his head instead of saying no. It's so weird, isn't it? Without someone saying anything they can give off an aura or vibe, and with this older guy driving I didn't feel comfortable. Like I wanted to rest my eyes and ever sleep, couldn't. There was something not right about this guy. After a while, I did think that we are strangers in his space, and he can be how he wants to be driving along in his truck, and just because he's quiet and has got creepy eyes doesn't mean he chops up hitchhikers. I remember the time how dark it was, and I don't know how long he was driving us, but Terry was in a deep sleep. And yeah, I was struggling to keep awake, but in my head at the time I thought I was like some night's security, making sure this strange driver wasn't going to attempt to harm us. I remember the moment that I felt something wasn't quite right. And I noticed the smooth road we're on had changed. It was so dark. I couldn't make out where we were, but we seemed to have come off the freeway. I asked the driver, I said, "Where are we?" And the stranger turned his head and looked right at me and said, "I just need to take a slight detour." Now I'm telling you, as a hitchhiker, an ex-hitchhiker, that sentence is not something you want to hear. "What do you mean?" I said to the guy. He didn't answer me. I asked him again. "What do you mean?" Then he said, "This won't take long." There we were in some forest. It was black night outside, and I remember noticing a light fog. But the time I had so much traffic in my head, I was thinking, is this stranger going to drive us to his kill zone? I woke up Terry. He was all disorientated, not knowing what was happening. And like I said earlier, he was the calm one. "Don't worry about it," he said, and he mouthed the words without saying them. "There's two of us and only one of him." The truck was being driven deeper into the woods. The unknown journey seemed to go on forever. I can't tell you how long this detour was. The ride was getting bumpier. "I'm telling you now, me and my mates." Harry talked about this moment afterwards. "And we honestly felt at the time we were in a terrifying horror movie, a terrifying unpredictable horror movie. Or remember the adrenaline pumping around my body gave me that extra strength, that extra edge to react in case this weird man driving his weird truck might suddenly attack me and Terry. After what seemed forever, I noticed there was a building up her head and a heart. Remember, it was white, dirty white. And the closer we got to it, I recognized what this place was. It was a church in the middle of a forest. I could just make out at the time the gravestones in the cemetery." "Oh, nice. Call me happening off." "Oh, this truck driver has a hatred of young hitchhikers like us. When he picks up hitchhikers off the freeway, then he makes a detour to the Hornsey Church in the middle of some unknown forest. This strange man has got two graves ready for me and Terry, isn't a." He stopped the truck about 50 feet away from the entrance to the church. Then he turns the engine off and he leaves the headlights on, which lights up the front of the church. Then he jumps out. I'm looking at Terry and Terry is looking at me and he's doing the keep calm gesture with his hand. And I notice the keys are still in the ignition and I'm thinking, is this my moment to take control of the fear? I hear the driver get something from out the back of the truck. And then he walks across the front of the truck with about 4 black bags. I'm thinking, what's in the bags? What's he carrying? Body parts. And then he leaves the black bags by the front church door, and I'm channeling my adrenaline into my fists, preparing myself to punch this guy as hard as I can if he's about to attempt to murder us. I noticed this guy isn't very tall standing up, which makes me feel stronger. If he does try to attack us, we're in for a chance. We'll be okay. Or don't take my eyes off him as he walks from the church entrance back slowly in the rain and gets back into the truck. He doesn't even take any notice of me and Terry, and if he did, he'd notice how pumped I was, or just simply terrified. He turns on the ignition, the truck comes to life, and the weird bloke says I'd like to make a donation sometimes. When he said that, I just looked at Terry, and Terry's expression was, how stupid do you feel? I told you we'll be okay. And you know what, despite Terry's look on his face, I don't care. I felt how I felt at the time. And yes, I was absolutely terrified. It seemed to take another forever for the truck to return to their free way out of the forest. And the strange driver wasn't off the hook until we got to the freeway, because he could have made an attack after he dropped those bags off with whatever was in him. Once on the freeway, after a while, we hit a gas station and the guy said, I think I've taken you far enough. And you know what? That was fine by me. I prefer to be standing in a gas station in the middle of nowhere on a stormy night than spend another minute with that bloke driving that truck. Me and Terry have talked about that night for ages, and he's right, maybe I did overreact. But I'm telling you how I felt. And we joke about it from time to time, but I'm telling you at the time, it wasn't funny at all. And I'm never going to hitchhike again. Road trips across Canada ain't for me. A young couple were taking a road trip vacation. They took it in turns every 4 hours to share the driving. It was this summer of love time together to celebrate their 4 years of marriage. For the first time ever, they agreed to switch off their cell phones, and they agreed not to listen to the news on the radio, because news just brings your mood down. It's just gossip and opinion. So Free agreed when Brad said news is about politics, murderers, and celebrities with zero talent. Who cares for all that noise? These two had a great relationship because they simply listened to each other and were honest with each other. It was a hot day that day midway through their road trip vacation. It was going so well. Driving along a deserted freeway, they noticed a car upside down next to the road. This accident must have recently happened because no ambulance or police had arrived on the scene. The couple's car immediately stopped safely to help the people traveling in the crashed car. They noticed a woman in her 40s covered in blood, crying and disorientated. She was understandably shocked and confused. This lady was sitting down on the grass near the freeway sobbing. Sophie inbred comforted her. "They're a kind couple." Then Brad noticed a man in the passenger side, presumably dead. He checked, and he certainly was. The poor woman was grateful for their help. And after a while she managed to take a few deep breaths and explain to the rescuing couple what really just happened. The now blooded woman was traveling with her husband. Weather was good. The road at the time of the accident was fine, not too many cars about, and the older couple were traveling at a sensible speed, singing and laughing to the radio. The wife was driving at the time and smiling, then suddenly without any warning her husband sitting next to her in the passenger seat smiled and lifted up a kitchen knife and slashed it deep into then across his throat. The shock caused his wife to move the steering wheel round so quick the car flipped over several times. Her husband killed himself while she was driving. There is no murder involved. What could have caused the husband to do such a brutal suicide? What a terrible loss. The plan was a road trip from New York to Maine. There's plenty to do in between. They weren't afraid to detour off some side roads, and they had 10 days and only just over 2 of them were planned to be driving. The 3 girls in their mid-20s, Cindy, Jenner and Kate, were like sisters, friends forever. Oh yeah, they considered flying. But Cindy has a fear of flying. So driving was the way to go. They want you to spend a couple of days in Bar Harbor at the end, as 2 days is enough to get a real feel for the place. And they were keen on stopping in Portland and in Boston. They planned their trip so well, knowing about expected traffic delays, and they did everything to prepare to make sure it was going to be the fun road trip they also deserved. During the early part of their trip, they stopped at a fresh bistro in Connecticut, which was not that far from a rehabilitation center, just to get some food. It was Cindy's car and Kate was driving, so she, being the sensible one, didn't drink, but oh yeah, the other 2 girls did, and they waited for her afterwards in the car park. They had a lovely meal. But Katie left her jacket behind. Cindy and Jenna were giggling and laughing and singing in the car, which went on for a little bit longer than expected, as Katie was taking longer than necessary. The 2 girls waiting agreed that Kate went back in there because she liked the waiter. Their laughter gradually came to a silence when they noticed a swarm of police cars arrived at the restaurant. The police car suddenly flooded the car park, and they watched in total surprise the police officers running into the restaurant. The girls were wondering where Kate was. "Oh my God, she's in here. Is there a fight going on? With so many cops about, this is some bloody fight." And suddenly the girl screamed as a loud bang suddenly happened, and it wasn't a firearm. Bang. 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 The loud thudding repeat said it was coming from the roof of Cindy's car that they were waiting in. General was about to open the door to take a look, and an officer screamed at them all to remain in the car. Within seconds, the police surrounded the car. All focus was away from the restaurant and now on them, and the banging became more intense. An officer calmly said loudly, "Do exactly as I instruct you to do. Please slowly open both side doors." To confused, shocked girls did as they were told. And then the officer started to sound a little more desperate. "Now get out of the vehicle and walk towards me." They did this, and the banging on the metal slowed down. The police could see that Jenna and Cindy were visibly shaking, not knowing what's going on. The officer spoke again. "Don't turn around. Just focus on me." The officer repeated. "Don't turn around. Just look at me. You're both doing really well." Then the banging came to a stop. Then Cindy did the very thing she was told not to. She turned around. Oh my God. On top of her car was a man, someone she has never seen before. He was naked. She could see his dirty white skin and beard, his face. His mouth was wide open in an empty scream. He was standing like a proud king on a mountain after a vicious battle. His eyes were wide. They were dead eyes. Cindy's legs buckled when she realized what the naked stranger had been doing. The banging. His right hand was clenched in a fist. He hadn't been punching the Coles roof. Oh, no. Clasped in his fist was blonde hair connected to Kate's severed head of what was left of it. Then the screams and the tears started, followed by the loud snap of the policewoman's gun, which created immediate silence. Stephanie was a few hours into her trip to see her parents. The weather was perfect. The radio was playing nice and loud. She felt great. She overtook her truck on the freeway, and usually she wouldn't take any notice. But this truck stood out. It was a dirty truck. She could see someone had written with their finger, "Please clean me Griffey," like that always made her smile. Open empty road ahead. She embraced the stunning countryside. A few moments later, she noticed the dirty truck she passed in the distance behind was driving faster, catching up with her. She double-checks to make sure her car wasn't losing power. And yeah, all was good. The dirty truck was slowly catching up with her. Stephanie knows no other cars were about just her and the truck. She decided not to go into competitive mode and accelerate. She just continued to drive within the speed limit. A few minutes later, the truck was yards behind her. She looked into her rearview mirror and saw a dark figure driving, but she couldn't even see the truck driver's face because the truck's windscreen was too dusty. Eventually, the truck overtook and passed by. God, was a dirty truck. The truck pulled into her lane and kept a steady pace driving in front of her. Stephanie wanted the truck to continue to accelerate into the distance, but it just continued to drive in from the truck was not too far ahead nor too close. Gradually the weather changed and the rain started coming down. That dirty truck's gonna get a good free clean, she thought. She watched the dust and dirt fall away. And slowly the truck's true blue color was revealed. With the heavy rain coming down, it was safer for her to just slow down a bit, and the truck did the same. Stephanie could make out the truck had a black roof and glass side panels. The truck slowed down, so she overtook the truck again. And that's when she saw what was inside. Oh no. Oh my God. There was a body. She couldn't make out if it was a man or a woman, but it was definitely a dead body lying down. She then realized why the truck was never cleaned. The dirt covered up what it was carrying, so no one else could see inside. Stephanie panicked and looked into her rearview mirror. She was too far away to see what the driver looked like. She watched as the truck slowed down and turned left into a side road away from the freeway. She didn't see the truck again. And for Stephanie, that doughy truck was the creepiest thing she had ever seen. And whenever she drives along that stretch of road to visit her parents, she keeps looking out just in case for the same dirty truck. After our romantic weekend, it was just after 10 p.m. when I dropped my wife off at Halifax Airport. She travels a lot because of a job, and my 5-hour journey to Fredericton, New Brunswick was going to be a straight run. Here I prefer driving at night, because you can chew many miles when the freeway's clear. And for some reason, journeys always seemed quicker at night. I was driving on an empty freeway when I suddenly saw a silver car launch off an embankment and roll several times. And to my horror, I saw 2 people flying through the air. I eventually pulled over and called 911. I gave the location details and asked dispatch if I should back down the freeway, and they said no, there's no need. There's an officer just a few minutes away. 30 minutes later, I get a call from the police asking me exactly where I witnessed this accident. I told him everything. I even told the officer the exact time of the accident, which was 5 minutes past midnight. You see, I remember looking at my car's clock just before it happened. Then the officer told me that he was actually at the very location I gave, and there was nothing there. No sign of an accident, no tire marks, no crashed car, no broken glass, nothing at all. When I got home, I went online and Googled it, and this is what I found out: exactly 12 years ago to the day 14 ages was speeding down a road when the driver suddenly lost control. The silver car flipped over the safety barrier and rolled down an embankment. All 4 of them were tragically killed. The time of the accident was 12:05 a.m. I'm a drummer in a band, and I was driving to a gig a few hours' drive away. I started out around 5 p.m. to get to the venue for 9. My car's a bit old, but she's reliable, and to be honest, I can't afford an upgrade at the moment. The rest of the band were already on their way, I just had to leave later due to other work commitments. I've never had a problem with my sat nav, and sure enough, it suggested the quickest route. I had a trouble-free trip or nearing the venue to drive over a very old bridge. It must have been like 100 years old at a guess. I respectfully drove across it slowly and suddenly noticed a fog embraced my car. My vision in front, even with my fog lights on, was limited, and eventually, when I crossed the bridge, the fog slowly disappeared. I guess the drop underneath that bridge must be deep. And yet there was no way I was gonna stop in the dark to lean over and take a look. Just after my car moved away from the bridge, I looked into the rearview mirror and saw someone standing on the bridge. Not moving, just standing still. When I got to the venue, I had a drink and a bite to eat, and I told the pretty girl behind the bar what I saw. And she told me a young girl called Sean hung herself on that bridge a few years ago. I'm going to take you back 25 years ago. I was driving a rental we exploring Florida on well. I was driving through Clearwater, and I decided to stay in a motel for the night. I got some food and had a drink at the bar next door and started talking to a fine-looking girl. She loved my accent, and I knew I was in for some fun when she became over-friendly. I remember we tried to get into a few nightclubs, and I can't remember why they didn't let us in. I guess it was probably because it was so late. Eventually, we found a secluded wooden seating area in the dog some distance behind the motel. No one else was around, just us. We made out and spent time afterwards kissing and cuddling and chatting in the warm dark, having a smoke. Then in the darkness, I saw a torchlight in the distance moving towards us. We both quickly got dressed. Then, as the light drew closer, I heard the rattling of keys, and I guess this person was some security guard. In fact, he was a friendly policeman. He said we shouldn't hang around where we were, because 2 days before exactly where we were hanging out, a couple were attacked by alligators. Girls in a critical condition, while the guy was dragged into the swamp and his body has not been found. It was so dark, we didn't even notice the edge of the swamp a few feet away until a cop has shined his torch on it. Since that trip so long ago, I've never returned to Florida and are still to this day have nightmares of what terror could have happened that evening we had. Have hitchhiked all over Europe, Middle East, USA. So I'm pretty experienced. But the worst road trip I've ever had was in my home country of England. A few years ago, I just got back from a really cool trip to Norway, and I needed a lift to visit some friends up north. I was at a gas station off the notorious freeway known as the M25, which is a huge road that circles around London. It's known for its bad traffic, its serious accidents, and just being a nightmare to drive along, unless you're a really experienced London driver. So there was me, I was trying to get a lift to take me to Liverpool to spend time with my mates. And after loads of sorry, may I go in that way, 2 guys offered to take me. Now I've always listened to my gut, my instinct, and these guys didn't give off a good vibe to me. But to be honest, at the time, I was so exhausted. I was absolutely knackered. I was just grateful someone just offered to help me out. I persuaded myself they're just being helpful and friendly. And I got in the back of their van. Oh, okay, nowhere to sit down. No windows, great. The van was empty, and at the back of their seats at the front where the lads sat there was all boarded up with plywood. I couldn't see him. There was just a letterbox slit in the center. It was then I realized I'd just made a big mistake, which could have cost me my life. They drove off, and then they drove really fast, turning sharply, tires screeching. My body was like a rag doll bashing into the metal floor and roof. My nose was bleeding. My arms were in so much pain. Instead of screaming at them and begging them to stop, I told them that I'm just not impressed. And I suggested they stop immediately and let me be on my way. Oh, no, they just continued to have their nasty, cowardly fun. And I swear at the time, I thought they were going to stab me to death in some remote field. At some point, thankfully, I managed to position myself holding on to a small length of lever belt hanging off from the bottom side of the vane. I kept calm. I kept breathing. And I didn't want them to realize how much pain I was in or how terrified I really was. I was just so angry at myself for not listening to my gut instinct. After God knows how long, they brake sharply, and one of them opened the rear doors and jumped out. Oh yeah, they sped away very quickly. I can tell you, so they was by the side of some small side road in the middle of where the hell am I, but the main thing is I was alive. And that's all that mattered. Thankfully, a nice couple in a nice car drove me to the start of the northern M1 freeway, and it was there I managed to get a ride to Liverpool. I found out later there had been a series of non-related van abductions in the UK. One poor man stepped off of paths, then a few moments later, some men suddenly placed a bag over his head and forced him into their van. He was later found unconscious next to a main road. The confused gazer had no idea how long they kicked him in the van before knocking him out. On the news, they were talking about a van driver who attempted to abduct pedestrians, normal people just walking along, going about their business. They had several reports of a white van driver acting in suspicious circumstances. And there had been similar reports being mirrored across some towns and cities in the UK. Oh, I realize I was seriously lucky apart from getting a few bruises after being bashed about a bit, and I was so surprised after the event of how common abductions are nothing in the future. If I do ever hitchhike again, I ain't doing it on my own, that's for sure. So if you apply planning a road trip, carry a smartphone and charger, bring as little as possible to allow for a comfortable ride. Remember, sometimes there's hundreds of miles between towns, especially in the Midwest and rural areas of America, so there's less access to get gas. So fill your tank every chance you get. It ain't gonna be easy, and things will go wrong. But if you keep an open mind, stay calm and learn to just go with the flow, you'll find that your road trip is going to be well worth it. And one final piece of advice. Never stop on the side of the road in the middle of the night.